The Vorthen coasted through the cold emptiness of space, its engines humming softly as the crew worked in quiet precision. The mission was simple: exploration and cataloging of new worlds, a task that had grown routine for the Exilari in the centuries of their expansion. But something felt different as they approached the planet. It had been uncharted, an anomaly on their map, a forgotten speck that hadn't been touched for generations. And yet, here they were, drawn toward it like a moth to a flame. Lieutenant Vestra, the ship's chief navigator, sat at the console, her eyes scanning the readouts. The planet below was barren, its surface a patchwork of shattered ruins and barren deserts. Once, it had been a human colony, a thriving, hopeful outpost in the depths of space. But that was decades ago. The data they had showed no signs of life. The colony had disappeared, its inhabitants vanishing without a trace. It had become one of the galaxy's many unsolved mysteries, lost to time. Then the signal came. It wasn't a typical distress call, Veshra noted. Most distress signals had specific patterns, flares, frequencies, or simple beacons designed to draw attention. This one was different. The signal was old, its origin buried deep beneath layers of debris, but it was unmistakably human, a low-frequency pulse that seemed to echo from the planet's surface, steady and insistent. It wasn't a distress call sent out of panic or desperation. It was a cry for help, yes, but one born out of patience, as though the sender had been waiting for a long time. "Captain," Veshra's voice was tight with surprise. "We've got something. A signal. A distress beacon. It's coming from the surface." She paused, tapping a few keys. "It's decades old, but it's still active. Someone's alive down there." Captain Korak, the commanding officer of the Vorthen, turned from the observation window, his gaze hardening. The thought of life on a supposedly abandoned world was an anomaly that could not be ignored. They had encountered empty colonies before, ghost worlds where the populations simply vanished. But a working signal? That was something entirely new. "Set a course for the signal's location. Prepare for landing. I want all crew on alert." Korak's tone was firm, commanding, but there was an edge of curiosity buried beneath the order. He was a seasoned leader, yet even he couldn't dismiss the pull of this mystery. The crew scrambled to prepare. As the Vorthen descended into the planet's atmosphere, the landscape below grew clearer. Wrecked buildings, half sunken into the dirt, stood like tombstones in a graveyard of forgotten hopes. Entire blocks of the city were reduced to rubble, the once proud structures now just hollow shells. There was no movement, no sign of life, except for the strange signal. The ship touched down in a large clearing, the engine's hum giving way to the stillness of the planet. The crew exited, armed and alert, eyes scanning the horizon. But there was nothing. No wildlife. No other ships. Just the eerie silence of an abandoned world, its secrets buried beneath the dust. Then, in the distance, they saw it. A small outpost tucked behind a wall of debris. The signal was stronger now, a beacon of light in the wasteland. And from it, they could feel something else. A presence. Someone was waiting for them. The captain motioned for his team to move out. "Stay sharp. And remember, this planet's been abandoned for years. Whatever we find down there, we're not going to like it." But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more dangerous than they could imagine. The Exilari made their way across the barren landscape, the eerie stillness of the abandoned world pressing in from all sides. Their boots crunched against the cracked earth, the sound strangely loud in the silence. The outpost loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the gray sky. Its walls, once sturdy, were now worn and weathered by years of neglect, but they still stood. The faint hum of the distress signal was unmistakable, drawing them in. Captain Korak led the way, his steps purposeful as the rest of the team followed close behind. Veshra, the navigator, scanned the surroundings with a practiced eye. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were being watched, though there was no sign of movement. No life. Nothing. They reached the base of the outpost, where the entrance was partially obscured by debris. Korak approached cautiously, giving the door a firm push. It creaked open with a groan, revealing a dark interior lit only by the faint flicker of emergency lights. The scent of old metal and dust filled the air as they entered, their weapons drawn, every sense alert. The room was empty, save for the remnants of what had once been a command center. The consoles were dark, their screens cracked, and scattered papers littered the floor. But there, in the far corner of the room, was a figure. A man, human, unmistakably, sat hunched against the wall, his knees drawn up to his chest. He was clad in tattered military gear, his face shadowed by a thick beard that had grown unevenly. His clothes were worn and patched, and his eyes, though tired, held a sharpness that felt out of place in the desolation. A rifle rested across his lap, and beside him, an old communicator buzzed with the faint hum of the distress signal. He didn't move when they entered, didn't acknowledge their presence. It was as though he had been waiting for them, as if their arrival was an inevitability he had long since come to accept. Captain Korak was the first to speak. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady but firm. There was no mistaking the authority in his tone, though it held a hint of disbelief. He had expected this place to be abandoned, empty. Instead, they found a living, breathing human in the heart of this desolate ruin. The man raised his head slowly, locking eyes with Korak. His gaze was sharp, piercing, and there was something unsettling in the way he regarded the Xelari. "I'm Captain Elias Carter," he said, his voice low and gravelly, as though the years of solitude had worn it raw. "And I've been expecting you." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The Xelari exchanged glances, their confusion deepening. Expecting them? How could he have known they were coming? Veshra stepped forward, her voice cautious. "Expecting us? We've just received the distress signal. There's no record of any survivors here." Carter's lips twisted into a grim smile. "There's no record of anyone because they're all dead. Everyone who was here is gone, and I'm the last one standing." His eyes flickered to the communicator beside him, still faintly pulsing. "But I've been waiting. For a long time." His words were cryptic, the weight of them sinking in like a stone. Carter didn't seem afraid, didn't seem surprised by their presence. In fact, he seemed almost prepared, as though he had been waiting for this moment, this meeting, long before the Xelari ship had ever set course for the planet. Captain Korak took a step forward, his expression hardening. "Why didn't you leave? Why stay here?" Carter's gaze flickered to the remains of the ruined city outside, his face shadowed by a mix of weariness and something darker. "Because I couldn't leave, and because, somehow, I knew you'd come. The signal was for you." He paused, eyes narrowing. "You're not the first to show up, but you'll be the last." The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of Carter's words settling over the group like a heavy fog. They had expected a rescue mission, but instead, they had found a survivor, someone who had been trapped on this world for far longer than they could have imagined. And now, it seemed, he was warning them about something even worse. Korak couldn't shake the feeling that the true horror of this world had only just begun to reveal itself. The silence in the room was palpable, thick with questions left hanging in the air. Captain Korak studied Carter, his sharp mind trying to piece together the fragments of this strange situation. A human survivor, alone for decades, waiting for them, expecting them. None of it made sense. The Xelari had encountered abandoned worlds before, even those where entire populations had mysteriously disappeared. But a lone survivor, sitting here with knowledge he shouldn't have, was something entirely new. Korak broke the silence, his voice firm but filled with curiosity. "What happened here, Carter? Where is everyone?" Carter shifted slightly, his expression unreadable as he gazed at the floor. His fingers tightened around the rifle across his lap, his knuckles white with the strain. It started slowly, he began, his voice rough, as though he were forcing the words out. "At first, it was just a few disappearances. People going missing, no signs, no trace. We thought it was some kind of attack. The usual things, raiders, pirates. But we were wrong." He leaned forward, his face etched with the weight of memories he clearly didn't want to relive. Then it spread. Entire sectors went silent, whole neighborhoods gone in the blink of an eye. People just vanished. No bodies. No screams. Nothing but empty houses and buildings like they'd never been there at all. Veshra, ever the scientist, stepped forward, her brow furrowed. But why? How could something so inexplicable happen? There's no record of this on any galactic charts. No mention of these events in any of the archives. Carter's lips twitched into a grim smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. That's the problem. No one believed it. No one wanted to. We tried to send out warnings, but the transmissions were too scrambled, too weak. The moment the first fleet arrived to investigate the creatures that were taking us, they were already here. The creatures? Korak asked, a chill running down his spine. What kind of creatures? Carter's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. They're not like anything you've ever encountered. We thought they were just animals at first, a new species native to the planet. But there's something else entirely. Intelligent. Tactical. They hunt in silence, taking their prey one by one. He paused, his gaze flickering toward the broken windows that looked out onto the ruins of the city. By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late. The colony was already lost. They're not just predators. They're a species that thrives on fear, on isolation. They make you feel like you're being watched, and then they make you wish you were. The room grew colder, the air heavy with unease. Carter's words painted a picture that was hard to swallow, a nightmare scenario that Xilari had never prepared for. Veshra's voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. So, you're telling us there are creatures out there, hunting in the dark, and we're not going to survive if we stay here. Carter didn't answer immediately. Instead, he rose slowly, his movements deliberate, almost mechanical. He walked over to a nearby terminal, flicking a few switches. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of old, grainy images. There were creatures in them, monstrous beings, humanoid but twisted, with elongated limbs and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the very screen. These things, Carter said, his voice steady but tinged with bitterness, were the ones who wiped out everyone. They're hunters, and I've been trying to figure out how to stop them ever since. Korak leaned closer, studying the images, trying to comprehend the nightmare Carter had endured. You've been here alone, fighting these creatures for all this time? He asked, his voice a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Carter nodded slowly. Alone. Everyone else died long ago. And now I'm just trying to make sure they don't get to you too. The room was silent once more, the weight of Carter's words sinking in. It wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. The Xilari were trapped in a war zone, facing an enemy that was both invisible and relentless. The stakes had escalated from a simple investigation to survival itself. Korak glanced at his crew, each one of them processing the gravity of their situation in their own way. It was clear that the galaxy held more secrets than they could ever have imagined, and that they had just walked straight into one of its deadliest. Night fell over the planet, the darkness creeping over the desolate landscape like a blanket, smothering what little light remained. The sky above, once a dull gray, deepened into an oppressive black. The Vorthan sat silently on the ground, its crew huddled inside the outpost, still processing the revelations of the day. The planet, which had seemed like a quiet, abandoned world, now felt alive with an unspoken menace. Carter stood by the window, his eyes scanning the horizon. His stance was rigid, his every muscle taut, as though he were waiting for something to appear. The Xilari crew had gathered in the command room, the low hum of their discussions filling the air. Veshra was examining the data collected from their scans, trying to find any signs of activity. Korak paced, his mind working through every angle of their current predicament. We need to make a plan, Korak said, breaking the silence. His voice was low but urgent. We don't know what we're up against, and sitting here won't get us any answers. Carter turned from the window, his gaze hardening. Your ship's technology can't help you here. These creatures are not something your scanners can detect. They don't move like anything you've ever encountered. His voice was tinged with a bitterness born of years of frustration. Trust me, if you're expecting to just sit here and wait for this to blow over, you're wrong. A shiver ran down Veshra's spine as she continued to study the data. There's something strange about the planet. The energy readings are fluctuating in ways I don't understand. Almost like she stopped herself, eyes wide. It's as if something's manipulating the planet's electromagnetic fields. Korak glanced at her, concern etched on his face. What do you mean? Like a cloaking device. Veshra shook her head. No, it's not that simple. It's something more organic. I can't explain it, but it's like the planet itself is alive. Carter's expression darkened at the mention of the planet's strange energy. That's the signal you're picking up. They'd been here long enough to link themselves to the planet. It's part of the reason why no one could escape. The creatures, they can control the environment, manipulate it in ways you don't understand. The air grew thick with tension. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the broken remnants of the city. The sound was eerie, unnatural. There were no other noises, no wildlife, no distant rumble of machinery. Just the wind. And then there was a sound, a soft, almost imperceptible clicking noise that echoed from the walls of the outpost. The hairs on the back of Veshra's neck stood up. Did you hear that? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Everyone froze, their eyes darting around the room. There it was again, the clicking. Closer this time. Carter's eyes narrowed. They're here. The realization hit the crew like a punch to the gut. They had been warned, but the words had not fully registered until now. The creatures were real. They had been hunting them from the moment they landed. Korak was the first to move. Everyone to the defensive positions. Weapons ready. Stay close. The clicking grew louder, more distinct, as though something was skittering along the walls outside, just out of sight. The room fell into an eerie silence, the only sound their breathing, shallow and rapid. The sense of being watched was overwhelming, as if invisible eyes were piercing through the walls, studying every move they made. Carter stood motionless, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew this sound all too well. They're not here to just kill, he muttered. They're here to make us afraid. Fear is what feeds them. Suddenly, there was a sharp, guttural screech from outside. The walls of the outpost shuddered as something slammed into them with terrifying force. They're testing us, Carter said, his voice low but resolute. This is their game. They want us to make the first move, but we can't give them that satisfaction. The crew braced themselves, knowing that the night ahead would be nothing short of a nightmare. They had entered the domain of a predator, and now they were its prey. The sound of scraping claws against the walls of the outpost intensified, and the crew's nerves were stretched taut. The clicking, like the scratching of nails on stone, reverberated through the building. Carter's words echoed in their minds. Fear is what feeds them. Korak clenched his fists, trying to maintain control. His instincts screamed at him to take charge, to lead his crew out of this nightmare. But the terror in the air was palpable. The creatures were closing in, and there was no way to predict where they would strike next. Stay sharp, Korak commanded, his voice steady despite the knot of tension in his stomach. He gestured for Veshra and the others to take defensive positions around the room. If they're going to test us, then let's make sure they regret it. The crew spread out, weapons at the ready. Their fingers hovered over triggers, hearts racing. The clicking sound grew louder, almost deafening now, as though something or many things were moving outside, just beyond the walls. Veshra, her face pale, scanned the monitors again. The strange energy readings had intensified, spiking erratically. It was like the planet itself was alive, pulsing with the creature's movements. It's like they're everywhere, she said, her voice tinged with fear. The electromagnetic fields are fluctuating again. They're surrounding us. Carter moved toward the window, his eyes narrowing. They've learned to use the planet's energy to hide themselves. They move through it, like shadows. We'll never see them coming. Outside, the wind howled even louder, rattling the structure. Something heavy collided with the wall near the entrance, sending vibrations through the building. The crew flinched, weapons snapping toward the sound. Then, as if on cue, the doors to the outpost slammed open with a deafening crash. In the split second it took for the crew to react, the creatures burst into the room, shadows against the dim emergency lights. They were fast, unnervingly so. Tall, gaunt figures with elongated limbs and dark, glistening skin. Their eyes glowed faintly, like burning embers in the darkness, but it was their movements that were most terrifying. They moved like liquid, their bodies contorting unnaturally, fluidly. A blur of motion, a flash of teeth. One of the creatures lunged at Veshra, its claws extending toward her throat. She gasped, raising her weapon, but before she could fire, Carter was there. He tackled the creature, throwing it to the ground. It hissed, baring sharp teeth, and scrambled to regain its footing. Carter rolled away, narrowly avoiding the creature's retaliatory strike. The crew opened fire. Lasers erupted in quick succession, but the creatures seemed to anticipate every shot. They twisted and darted through the air, almost too fast for the eye to follow. The blasts missed more than they hit, striking walls, shattering equipment, leaving scorched marks in the air. "Don't shoot blindly," Korak shouted, trying to steady the crew. "Focus on one target." But it was impossible. The creatures seemed to multiply, their bodies disappearing and reappearing in a blur of motion. Their screeches echoed off the walls, sending waves of fear and confusion through the crew. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the creatures retreated into the shadows, vanishing back into the darkness of the outpost halls. The crew stood frozen, weapons aimed at the now empty space, hearts pounding in their chests. "What in the name of the stars?" Veshra gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. "They're toying with us," Carter muttered, his breathing ragged. "This is what they do. They test us, push us to the brink. And when they're ready, they strike for the kill." Korak's gaze hardened. "Then we need to make sure they don't get the chance." The outpost was quiet once again, save for the heavy breathing of the crew and the distant, almost imperceptible clicking that echoed through the walls. The hunt had begun, and the Xalari were now the prey. The outpost was eerily quiet after the creatures had vanished back into the shadows. The crew was left breathless, shaken by the speed and ferocity of the attack. The walls still hummed with the remnants of the electromagnetic interference, making it feel like the planet itself was alive, breathing alongside them. Korak stood motionless for a moment, eyes scanning the room for any signs of movement. His pulse was steady, but his mind was racing. The creatures had tested them, no doubt. They had made their move, and now they were waiting, observing, learning. "We need to get out of here," Veshra whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her weapon, scanning the room with wide, frantic eyes. "We can't keep hiding like this. They're too fast, too strong." "No," Carter's voice cut through the tension. He was standing by the window again, his face pale but resolute. "Leaving won't help. They'll hunt us down if we try to leave the outpost. They know this place. They'll trap us before we can get far." Korak's gaze turned toward him, his brow furrowed. "Then what do you suggest? We can't just wait for them to finish us off." Carter turned slowly, his eyes dark with the weight of experience. "We need to make them come to us. Draw them out, one by one. Make it so they can't hide in the shadows anymore." Korak shook his head. "How do we do that?" "They use the planet's energy to stay hidden," Carter explained. "But the more they rely on it, the more they draw attention to themselves. We need to disrupt the planet's electromagnetic fields, disrupt their ability to cloak themselves." Veshra stepped forward, her mind already working through the calculations. "I can try. The energy signatures are chaotic, but if we can find a way to reverse the polarity on the generators, it might disrupt their cloak. It'll at least force them to show themselves." Korak nodded sharply. "Do it. We need to take the fight to them." As Veshra moved to the console, Carter joined her, pulling up a map of the outpost. "There's a generator room underground," he said. "It's the heart of the outpost. If we can reach it and overload it, we might be able to throw them off their game." "Underground?" Korak's eyes narrowed. "Are you sure about this? It could be a trap." Carter's gaze was hard. "It's the only way. They'll know we're here, though we might have a chance to strike back." Veshra was already tapping furiously at the console, pulling up schematics. "I can route the power to the generator room. It's going to be tricky, but if we overload the core, It should disrupt the electromagnetic field. But we have to move fast. There was a moment of tense silence as the crew gathered their things and prepared for what was to come. The weight of their decision pressed down on them like a stone. There was no turning back now. Korak checked his weapon, then looked around at his crew. Stick together. Don't stray from the plan. We get in, overload the generator, and get out. If we do this right, we have a shot at surviving. Carter stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the darkness outside. And don't think for a second that they won't be waiting for us. They know we're here. They'll come after us the moment we make our move. The crew tightened their grips on their weapons, ready to face whatever came next. The darkness outside was closing in, but they couldn't afford to hesitate. They had to move before the creatures could strike again. "Let's go," Korak said, his voice low but steady. "Time's running out." The crew moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls as they made their way toward the underground generator room. With every step, the sense of being watched grew stronger. The hunt was still on, and they were walking straight into the heart of it. The journey to the underground generator room was fraught with tension. The outpost, once a place of relative safety, now felt like a maze of uncertainty. Each corner, each doorway was a potential ambush. Every step was measured, the crew's senses heightened, as if the very air around them was thick with impending danger. Carter led the way, moving swiftly through the hallways, his eyes darting to every shadow, every flicker of movement. His experience on this planet, trapped and alone for so long, had taught him how to read the subtle signs of the creature's presence. The floor creaked beneath them with every step, and the walls seemed to close in around them. "We're getting close," Carter said, his voice low, barely above a whisper. "The generator room is just up ahead." Veshra kept glancing at her scanner, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the readings. The energy readings are fluctuating more. It's almost like something is trying to interfere with our movements. Korak's hand tightened around his weapon. "Whatever it is, we need to move faster." Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the hall. The crew froze in place, the sound unmistakable. It was close. Too close. Carter's eyes narrowed, and he motioned for them to move into the nearby alcove, out of sight. The growl became a screech, followed by a series of clicking noises, louder this time. The creatures were hunting them, and they were close. Korak's mind raced. The creatures could sense them now. They knew they were here. It was only a matter of time before they were ambushed. "Stay calm," Korak murmured, his voice barely audible. "We stick to the plan." Carter nodded but didn't speak. His eyes were locked on the hallway, every muscle in his body tensed, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. The clicking grew louder, closer, and then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence fell, suffocating and complete. Veshra's breath caught in her throat. Where did they go? Carter didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the hall ahead. He was waiting, listening. His senses honed from years of isolation on this cursed world. Then, from the shadows, they came. The creatures appeared in the blink of an eye, shifting shapes in the darkness, their glowing eyes gleaming in the dim light. There were 3 of them, their bodies contorted and fluid, moving like liquid shadows, impossibly fast. Their claws scraped against the metal floor as they approached, their mouths open in twisted, silent snarls. The crew opened fire. The blasts of energy shot through the air, but the creatures dodged with unnerving speed. One of them lunged at Carter, its claws outstretched. He barely had time to react, twisting away as it scraped past him, leaving a shallow gash on his arm. "Move," Korak barked, pushing forward. "Keep firing." Veshra's shots were precise, but the creatures moved so quickly, it felt like they were everywhere at once. One of them flanked them, darting in from the side. It was too fast to track, but just as it closed in, Carter fired a quick shot, hitting it square in the chest. The creature shrieked, stumbling back, but it wasn't enough to stop it. It hissed, eyes burning with anger as it recovered. "Keep moving." Korak shouted again, stepping forward and firing at another creature, forcing it to retreat into the shadows. They pushed forward, sprinting toward the generator room, but the creatures were relentless, stalking them, waiting for another chance to strike. The hallway stretched before them like a tunnel of uncertainty, each step closer to the generator room adding to the weight of their desperation. The creatures weren't going to let them reach their goal without a fight. As they neared the door to the generator room, Carter turned, firing at the pursuing creatures once more. "Get inside," he yelled, his voice full of urgency. With one final push, the crew rushed into the generator room, the door slamming shut behind them with a resounding thud. They were momentarily safe, but the creatures were still out there. Now they would have to make their stand. The generator room was dimly lit, the flickering lights casting long shadows that danced across the walls. The heavy door slammed shut behind the crew with a reverberating thud, cutting off the creatures for a brief moment. But everyone knew it wouldn't last long. They were only buying themselves time. The room was a cavernous space filled with humming machinery and blinking consoles. Veshra immediately rushed to the central control panel, her fingers flying across the interface. "I'm activating the overload sequence," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "It'll take a minute, but it should destabilize the electromagnetic field and disable their cloaking." "We don't have a minute," Korak replied, his eyes scanning the room nervously. He could feel it in the air. The creatures were getting closer. It was only a matter of time before they'd reach the door. "Do what you need to, but hurry." Carter moved to the far side of the room, his back against the wall, watching the door. Every muscle in his body was tense, ready to spring into action. His mind was racing, but all he could focus on was the sound, the soft, rhythmic clicking that had been growing louder. It was out there, on the other side of the door, waiting for the moment to strike. "Are we sure this will work?" Veshra asked, glancing over her shoulder as she continued to input the necessary commands. Carter's eyes didn't leave the door. "If it doesn't, we're all dead. There's no other way." The creatures have learned to use the planet's energy to mask their presence, to remain hidden in the shadows. But if they could overload the generator, it would disrupt the electromagnetic fields enough to reveal the creature's true form, forcing them to show themselves. It was their only hope, and they didn't have time to second-guess it. Outside, the clicking grew louder. The creatures were circling, testing the door, trying to find a way inside. Carter gritted his teeth. It's now or never. Veshra's fingers moved in rapid succession, and then the central panel blinked red. Overload sequence activated. It's starting. The machines around them began to hum louder, the sound growing in intensity. The walls trembled slightly, as if the very structure of the room was being shaken. "We need to get to cover," Korak shouted. "Now." But it was too late. The door exploded inward with a deafening crash. The creatures poured into the room, their glowing eyes burning with hunger. They were faster than ever, a blur of shadows and movement. In an instant, the room was filled with the shrieking, screeching sound of the creatures as they attacked. Korak fired first, his weapon discharging with a bright flash. The creature nearest to him screeched and twisted out of the way, too fast to be hit. Another one lunged at Veshra, its claws slashing through the air. Carter dove to intercept, grabbing the creature mid-air and using its momentum to slam it into a nearby console. It hissed, twisting to free itself. The overload sequence was nearing completion, the hum of the machinery growing louder. But it was a race against time. Carter's mind was clouded with the knowledge that they needed one more push to finish this. They couldn't stop now. "Stay focused," Carter shouted. "Keep them off Veshra." Veshra was already at the control panel, her hands moving frantically to complete the sequence. The creatures were relentless, attacking from all sides, but the crew held their ground, firing whenever they had the chance. And then, with a final, earth-shattering hum, the generator overloaded. The room was bathed in a blinding light as the electromagnetic field collapsed. The creatures howled, their forms flickering for a split second, like distorted shadows being revealed in harsh light. It was enough. For the first time, the crew saw them for what they truly were. Hideous, twisted creatures, their long limbs stretched unnaturally, their eyes glowing with malice. But they were no longer invisible. With a roar, Carter lunged at the nearest creature, firing point blank. The blast hit its chest, sending it flying backward, but others closed in fast. The final stand had begun.